This tutorial is going to go over one of the pricing problems that's going to be in your homework. Now, this isn't exactly going to be like the one you're going to see for your application. However, a lot of the same techniques and strategies can be used moving forward. So let's take a look at this problem. We're working for a daycare, a recreational daycare program, and we're given the following information. We know that we have fixed costs, capital costs. These are related to things that we've purchased over $500. It could be a vehicle, it could be a building we just purchased, and that's the remaining balance. Overhead and fixed operating costs. Okay, these are annual costs at this point. And we're also given the following information on variable costs down here. Hourly rate of $15. Number of employees per hour right now is 4, and we're operating 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. We're taking 2 weeks off over Christmas, and we roughly average 20 students per hour. We're going to have a 10% contingency rate, and that's down here. And we've gone ahead and done some of the calculations here. So let's go ahead and see how I've set up my problem to keep myself sane. Now, we've gone ahead and done the math with the variables here, but I'm going to encourage you to think about how to calculate variable employee costs. Your homework is going to have, you look at a number of different scenarios. So you may want to set up something that you can change the variables, for example, number of employees or their hourly wage, to see how that's going to affect your pricing. Okay, so let's see how I've done it with the information given. So we know we have 4 employees. We have an hourly wage of $15. We can go ahead and put that into currency format. We're doing 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. And right now we're expecting to average around 20 students per hour throughout the year. So what we can do if we want to calculate the total variable cost, which I've already done for you down here, but you'll see why this might be useful in just a bit. Let's go ahead and figure out what our variable employee cost is going to be for the year. So it's going to equal the number of employees times the hourly wage times the hours per week times the number of weeks per year. So this is going to come out to $120,000, which based on our estimates is what it's going to cost for us to pay our employees throughout the year. We're assuming that that $15 an hour is going to be all inclusive. Student hours, now we charge daycare by the hour, so let's see what it's going to cost us. Let's figure out, we're going to need to figure out the number of student hours so we can figure out what it costs per hour. So the number of student hours is going to equal 40, that's 40 hours a week, times 50 weeks per year, times the average of 20 students per hour in an 8-hour day. So we have 40,000 student hours. I just put a little comment there so we can see how it's looking. So over here, we can also set up a way to calculate the number of teachers that we need, because this might change. Let's say we get more students or we have less enrollment than we had planned. Okay, so we've already plugged this in as a given, but you might want to make some things in Excel to make your life easier. And so what I've done here is let's just assume that we have a minimum student to teacher ratio of 1 to 5. So if we were going to divide the number of students, it's going to be by the divisor here, which is 5. And so what I've set up here is the minimum number of teachers needed. And since we can't have partial teachers, it would be really easy to just go 20 divided by 5 equals 4. But let's say we have 21 students, we can't have a partial teacher. So what you may want to do is use a function in Excel called round up. If we look at it here. And so it's equals round up, and then we can go ahead and take a look at the function arguments. And I'm just dividing the number of students by our ratio divisor, which is 5. And then what it's doing, if we leave this second number of digits, 0, it's going to give you a whole number. Okay. And you can already see what our answer is going to be. So you might be asking, how would this be useful? Well, let's say all of a sudden you had 2 extra students enroll at the end. You have space, but you weren't necessarily thinking about it. So let's go ahead and change this 20 over here to 22 and see what happens. Well, we now know the minimum number of teachers needed is 5 because we are over that 5-to-1 ratio. And that's going to change a number of things. It's going to change our total variable employee cost. It's also going to change our number of student hours that we think are going to be available. So let's go ahead and change this back to 20 and work through some of the rest of the problem. And then we can kind of play around with this later. Let's go ahead and plug in some numbers. We know that it's $50,000 for our capital cost. Our overhead is $35,000 per year. Our fixed operating costs are $75,000. And we can go ahead and sum up this set of numbers. Equals sum, and then I'm just going to take these 3 figures. So we know our total fixed cost for the year is going to be $160,000. Well, now let's go ahead and plug in our variable employee cost. We know that we figured that out over here, so I'm going to actually plug it in from our variable table. Let's just keep our variable operating costs at $60,000 right now. And so we can go ahead and sum up these as well. Equals sum, and then open parentheses. We can go ahead and select these 2. All right, so let's take a look at our pricing formula. We know that we're going to want to have fixed plus variable together, so let's go ahead and save ourselves some time and add up those 2 figures. 160 plus 180. We know that our contingency rate is going to be 10% in this case. So let's go ahead and put 10% in there. We know our total number of student hours. We've calculated that. So now we can go ahead with this and figure out our actual cost per student hour. So I'm going to go ahead and figure out the cost per student per hour. And that's what our pricing formula is going to give us. So we know it's going to be total fixed plus variable plus our contingency rate times total fixed plus variable. And we're going to divide that by a total number of student hours. We can go ahead and make this accounting. So we can see that our cost is $9.35 per hour. So let's move on to figuring out the subsidization rate. In this case, we're not doing any markup, but the state of Utah is going to cover 90% of the fees. So what we're going to have to do is how much are we going to pass on to the parents of these children? And so if we look up at our formula, it's 1 minus the subsidization rate. So in this case, it's going to equal 1 minus 0.9. Okay. And so you could also just go in here and remind yourself that it's 1 minus sub rate so you know how it was calculated. If we had a markup rate, it would be 1 plus the markup. But we don't have one for this one. So now we can come down here and figure out cost per hour with subsidization. And very simply, this equals the hourly rate times the subsidization rate. So it's going to cost roughly $1 per hour. So we see here that per week, it's going to cost us $37.40 per child per week. Now we can go ahead and expand that to the whole year. We know there's 50 weeks a year, so we can just go ahead and take this number and multiply it by 50, which we have up there. And then if we really wanted to break it down even further, we can divide this yearly figure by 12 to get the cost per month. But we might also want to compare that to what it would be without the subsidization. Again, we know that our hourly rate, we've already figured it here. We can multiply that number by 40. We can multiply the cost per week by 50. And if we wanted to get really sharp, we could figure it out per month. Okay, well, you see these numbers look a lot alike, and that's mainly because the subsidization rate is going to make everything 10% of what you would normally pay. So that's how you would figure out this problem. Now, again, I did want to talk about setting up your variable costs so you could manipulate the data. So again, let's say we had 25 students. We'd have 5 instructors. Our cost per hour would go down. Now, if we had 27 students, again, it would go down. And mainly that's because we are not adding any additional overhead cost. Okay? So let's say we had the same overhead cost, but we only had 12 students. Well, now our cost per hour is going to be $14.21. And we'll have 3 teachers. Again, a lot of that's because the fixed costs are not changing. Okay, so that's a tutorial on how to do pricing. You may want to reference some of these strategies when you're working through your homework.